It was already loud outside Club Chaos in Buckhead when the shooting stopped, leaving people ducking behind cars while others ran without looking back toward the entrance. Police reports later said Anthony Wolf Jones was found laid out near the lot edge while Lamont Girdy bled close by, both hit during the same burst. Witnesses kept talking about confusion, about scattered shells, about how nobody really knew who fired first in those early morning seconds. When detectives searched his pockets hours later, they logged roughly $7,000 in folded bills, a small detail that never stopped following his story. What makes it strange is how a man tied to Sean Puffy Combs, Biggie Smalls, Suge Knight rumors, and even Black Mafia Family nights still ended here without answers. Long before Atlanta headlines ever mentioned his name, Anthony Lamont Jones was just another kid growing up inside the Valley section of the Bronx during the 1970s. He was born on February 20th, 1965, and raised mainly by his mother, Barbara Jones, a hardworking woman who kept everything moving while his father stayed absent from daily life. Family Stories always describes Barbara pushing structure hard, making sure school stayed important, even when the neighborhood outside felt unpredictable. That contrast shaped him early, since classrooms carried routine, while nearby blocks dealt with poverty, overcrowded buildings, constant police sirens, all shaping instincts without anyone explaining it directly. People who knew him back then said he learned quickly how to read rooms, not from books, but from watching who walked fast or who stayed still on certain corners. The nickname that later followed him across nightclubs, courtrooms, even rap documentaries, actually started with something harmless from childhood teasing. Friends like Troy Brown used to clown his sharp widow's peak, joking he looked like Eddie Munster from the old television show The Munsters. Somebody shortened Wolfgang into Wolf during those early years, while his younger brother Terrence later picked up the tag Little Wolf naturally. The name stuck mostly because nobody argued against it, plus it matched how he moved quietly without trying too hard to stand out. That simple nickname would eventually travel miles away from Bronx hallways, turning into something people whispered differently once street reputations entered the picture. The Bronx during the late 1970s did not offer gentle surroundings for kids trying to stay fully clean from street gravity. Entire buildings burned from neglect or insurance scams, leaving blocks filled with empty shells that looked abandoned even while families still lived nearby. News crews back then filmed rubble on streets like Charlotte Street, showing America what urban collapse looked like up close. Those scenes shaped a generation who grew used to broken elevators, cold winters inside unheated apartments, plus neighbors hustling any way possible to survive. Growing up inside that environment meant understanding early that rules outside the home rarely matched the ones inside kitchens or church halls. Barbara Jones tried keeping her sons grounded through routines that felt strict compared with other households nearby. She enrolled Anthony at Harry S. Truman High School later on, believing education could widen options even if the surroundings kept narrowing possibilities daily. Family friends recalled how she sometimes homeschooled them on weekends, reviewing lessons herself since she worked in the education field at different points. That steady push gave him exposure to both discipline and freedom, which explains why classmates remembered him cracking jokes one minute, then flipping serious quickly when situations shifted. He was not considered a bully during those school years, more like someone protective, who rarely started problems but finished them when necessary. As teenage years rolled in during the early 1980s, neighborhood friendships began tightening into something slightly more structured than random hangouts. A small circle, including Lamont Girdy, Troy Brown, plus several other Valley kids, started sticking together wherever they went. They called themselves the Valley Mob casually, not as a criminal organization, more like a loose brotherhood protecting each other from nearby crews. Older residents remember them playing basketball during afternoons, then roaming blocks together at night when tensions with rival neighborhoods occasionally bubbled. Loyalty became their currency during that period since money stayed limited, but respect traveled fast across Bronx streets. The Valley Mob's reputation grew mostly through physical presence rather than flashy wealth or organized operations. Stories describe Anthony standing tall even as a teenager, built solid enough that people noticed him entering rooms without him saying much. Friends said he preferred handling disputes face to face, settling arguments with fists before weapons entered conversations later in life. That early pattern built a name based on toughness balanced with restraint, something older hustlers respected more than reckless behavior. Even those who disliked him rarely called him loud or attention-hungry, since his style leaned toward watching quietly before stepping in. Still, balancing school with neighborhood reality meant constantly switching mindsets depending on where he stood at any given moment. Inside classrooms, he could joke with teachers or talk about sports, especially basketball, which some say he considered pursuing seriously. Outside those walls, the same kid learned how to read tension quickly, noticing body language changes or unfamiliar faces hanging too long on corners. That dual existence explains why some childhood friends later described him as funny during daylight, yet guarded once nights arrived. It was not about pretending to be different people, but more about adjusting behavior to environments that demanded different instincts. By the time he graduated from Truman High School in 1983, people already noticed he carried himself older than most teenagers nearby. He briefly attended Bronx Community College afterward, trying to keep education alive while picking up jobs like UPS work or construction gigs. Those jobs showed he understood straight paths existed, yet they rarely paid enough compared with street opportunities floating around the mid-80s Bronx. That tension kept pulling him both directions, since legal paychecks felt stable but slow, while hustling stories spread about quick cash. Friends from that period often say he never fully chose one lane, instead drifting between them, depending on circumstances unfolding around him. What made Anthony stand out even before fame brushed past his name was the blend of humor and seriousness he carried naturally. He could clown with friends during cookouts, then turn quiet fast once unfamiliar faces entered spaces he considered sensitive. Older neighbors remember him helping carry groceries for elderly residents, gestures that complicated later portrayals of him as purely dangerous. That dual nature stayed consistent through most recollections, showing someone capable of warmth yet drawn repeatedly toward harder environments. Those early contradictions laid the groundwork for the life that followed, since the same traits that made him loyal also kept pulling him closer to situations where loyalty came tested. After finishing high school in 1983, Anthony Jones tried stepping into regular adulthood the way many Bronx kids from that era attempted first. He enrolled briefly at Bronx Community College, juggling classes while picking up work through United Parcel Service routes around the borough. Co-workers later remembered him showing up early, moving packages quietly without complaining, blending into routines that promised stability. Yet those steady hours never stretched paychecks far enough, especially living inside neighborhoods where money problems stayed constant background noise. That gap between effort and reward created pressure, since watching older guys flash quick cash made legal routes feel painfully slow. Construction work followed once college interest faded, pulling him onto job sites where labor felt honest yet exhausting. He hauled materials, worked scaffolds, did whatever supervisors needed, trying to stack income without slipping back into trouble. Still, long shifts offered little prestige in communities, measuring success through survival stories rather than resumes. Friends from the Valley often said those years showed he wanted something straighter, even if that desire stayed fragile. The problem was that opportunity rarely matched ambition in mid-80s Bronx realities. While he clocked those jobs during daylight, nights kept pulling him back toward familiar faces, moving differently across local blocks. The Valley mob still existed, only now members were growing older, responsibilities shifting alongside reputations expanding quietly. What began as teenage loyalty slowly gained weight, especially as younger kids started looking up to them for protection. That subtle transition turned friendship circles into neighborhood fixtures, where presence alone could influence how outsiders behaved. Nobody declared it an organization, yet people began treating it like one anyway. Street money started appearing gradually, never all at once, which made the shift feel less dramatic in real time. Small hustles circulated first, stories about running errands for older dealers or watching corners during intense stretches. None of it looked cinematic, more like low-level survival moves repeating across boroughs during the crack era. Rumors later exaggerated roles, turning ordinary hustling into legendary mythology without solid proof backing every claim. What remains consistent across accounts is that he began earning more outside legal paychecks, enough to change how peers viewed him. That new income altered identity faster than anything construction sites ever could offer him. Cash brought respect inside neighborhoods where financial control shaped social hierarchy more than job titles. Suddenly, he could help his family more, buy clothes that signaled progress, and move with confidence that others recognized instantly. Yet with that recognition came exposure, since earning outside legal systems often attracted attention from both rivals and law enforcement. The Valley mob presence grew heavier during that stretch, not louder, just more noticeable across nearby streets. By the late 1980s, tensions surrounding neighborhood crews intensified throughout New York, fueled by drug markets expanding aggressively. Disputes that once ended with fists slowly escalated into confrontations carrying higher stakes than teenage scuffles. Anthony's name surfaced more often in local conversations, sometimes tied to conflicts nobody documented formally. Those fragments never built full public narratives, yet they hinted at involvement deeper than casual hustling. Street memory preserved moments official paperwork rarely captured, creating reputations built through word rather than headlines. The turning point arrived around 1991 when he faced an attempted murder charge that finally forced his name into the legal system. Details remain murky today, since records stayed sealed, leaving room for competing versions about what actually happened. Some accounts suggest a retaliation shooting tied to neighborhood conflict, while others describe chaotic circumstances spiraling beyond control. Whatever the truth behind specifics, authorities moved aggressively, charging him alongside weapons possession counts that carried serious prison exposure. For the first time, survival instincts met institutional consequences that street circles could not shield completely. Prison changed everything, though not always in ways outsiders expect when reading headlines later. He served several years during the early 1990s, a stretch that hardened awareness rather than erasing identity completely. People claiming they knew him inside the facilities describe someone observant, staying alert without chasing unnecessary conflicts. That environment forces adaptation quickly, teaching patience alongside calculation, since every decision carries heavier consequences behind walls. Surviving that period required learning restraint, something former associates later noticed once he returned outside. The experience also sharpened how he viewed loyalty, since prison strips illusions about who stays solid during absence. Some friends maintained contact, sending support, reminding him that the valley still held its place. Others drifted away quietly, exposing realities about relationships tied mostly to convenience rather than commitment. Those lessons mattered deeply, shaping how he evaluated people once freedom returned. Prison did not erase his street ties, but it refined how carefully he navigated them afterward. When he came home around 1993, Bronx blocks looked familiar, yet slightly altered after years away. Crack-era damage still lingered, though music culture began shifting energy toward new possibilities emerging downtown. Friends remember him walking differently, less impulsive, speaking more slowly, while observing surroundings more closely. That subtle change reflected growth built through confinement, showing someone recalibrating rather than reinventing himself entirely. He did not return loudly, instead sliding back into environments quietly while recalculating next steps. Reputation followed him without needing introductions, carried through whispers from people who tracked cases closely. Surviving prison time attached credibility automatically within street hierarchies, valuing endurance over flash. Younger neighborhood figures began looking at him differently, treating him like someone who understood consequences firsthand. That quiet elevation did not come from media coverage, since mainstream outlets barely documented his story then. Instead, reputation spread through conversations in barbershops, corners, apartment hallways, forming a name built through lived experience. By the early 1990s, Anthony Jones stood at a crossroads, shaped by years of balancing legality with survival instincts. He had tested normal work, tasted street money, faced prison reality, then walked back into neighborhoods watching closely. Those combined experiences produced someone sharper, more deliberate, less likely to move without reading angles first. People who knew him then often say he seemed calmer, yet more dangerous, a contrast difficult to explain without witnessing it firsthand. That version of Wolf would soon step into circles far beyond Bronx corners, carrying lessons learned long before cameras ever noticed. When Anthony Jones stepped back into freedom around 1993, New York's music world was shifting in ways that felt bigger than neighborhood cycles. One name kept floating through conversations during that period, especially among uptown circles watching industry momentum closely. Sean Combs, still known mostly as Puffy then, was rising fast after leaving Uptown Records under Andre Harrell. Stories about his ambition traveled through Harlem and the Bronx, reaching people who understood both street culture and entertainment influence. That overlap created a natural reconnection once Wolf returned outside, with sharper instincts and familiar contacts. The two already knew each other before prison years separated their paths, since New York scenes stayed smaller than outsiders imagined. Puffy had been building relationships across boroughs, blending music hustle with social networking that reached far beyond studio walls. When they crossed paths again, both carried a momentum from different directions, one climbing industry ladders while the other returned seasoned from confinement. That meeting mattered more than it looked at first glance, since it connected street credibility with corporate ambition. Each man offered something the other lacked, forming a partnership rooted less in paperwork and more in trust. Around that same window, Puffy was laying the foundations for what would become Bad Boy Entertainment after his Uptown departure. He had artists like Craig Mack and a young Christopher Wallace waiting for breakthroughs, yet the label itself still felt fragile. Starting any independent venture in the early 1990s in New York required more than talent, since competition stayed fierce and resources were limited. That environment created demand for loyalty beyond boardrooms, especially when moving through clubs where reputations mattered daily. Entering that world meant navigating music politics alongside street realities nobody wrote contracts about. Wolf stepped into those spaces naturally, not as a celebrity, but as someone who understood pressure without needing explanations. People close to Bad Boy's early days often describe him appearing quietly around events, watching rather than announcing his presence. His role never came with formal titles at first, yet insiders treated him like insurance against unpredictable situations. That kind of protection mattered when young artists moved through packed venues where success attracted attention instantly. Puffy recognized that value early, which explains why their relationship deepened quickly once proximity returned. Legends about early money flowing into Bad Boy still circulate, though separating fact from folklore remains tricky decades later. Some accounts claim Wolf and friends from the Valley Mob helped provide startup cash using street earnings. Others downplay that narrative, suggesting his influence leaned more toward connections than direct investment. What stays consistent is acknowledgement that he stood near the label's foundation before fame exploded publicly. Whether through dollars or presence, his involvement rooted him inside Bad Boy's origin story permanently. Beyond finances, his real strength showed through problem solving rather than flashy involvement in daily operations. Situations that could derail young ventures often required someone comfortable handling tension without escalating chaos. Wolf carried that skill naturally, shaped by years navigating unpredictable environments where mistakes cost more than pride. People who worked around Puffy later described him as calm under pressure, stepping forward only when needed. That ability turned him into more than hired muscle, evolving into someone whose judgment carried weight during uncertain moments. Party promotion became another lane, where street awareness blended with entertainment energy during that period. Events organized under names like Buck Naked Productions helped build Bad Boy's visibility across East Coast cities. Those gatherings looked like simple nightlife on the surface, yet they doubled as networking hubs connecting artists, promoters, and underground figures. Wolf operated comfortably within that environment, moving between conversations without drawing unnecessary spotlight. That balance allowed him to bridge spaces that most people struggled to navigate without friction. Nightlife in early 1990s, New York demanded that kind of adaptability, especially as hip-hop moved deeper into mainstream attention. Clubs like the Tunnel and Limelight packed crowds carrying different agendas under one roof nightly. Promoters wanted smooth events, artists needed security, and investors watched from VIP sections, gauging energy carefully. Wolf's presence offered reassurance to people who valued stability more than headlines, even if his name rarely appeared publicly. Influence sometimes grows strongest when operating quietly behind the scenes. Others rarely notice. As Bad Boy began gaining traction through singles and radio momentum, Wolf's role evolved alongside the label's confidence. He traveled with Puffy more often, appearing around studios, showcases, and private gatherings where alliances formed organically. That exposure expanded his network beyond Bronx and Harlem boundaries, introducing him to executives, producers, and regional players, shaping industry direction. Yet he maintained low visibility, preferring influence over fame, while others chased recognition loudly. That decision kept his reputation grounded in street respect rather than tabloid curiosity. By the mid-1990s, Bad Boy was transforming from a hopeful startup into a cultural force reshaping East Coast hip-hop. Craig Mack's breakout and Biggie's early buzz pushed the label into conversations previously dominated by established giants. Through that rise, Wolf remained close without inserting himself into artist spotlight moments. People inside the camp often describe him as someone who preferred standing near exits or corners, watching dynamics unfold quietly. That observational style reinforced his image as a protector rather than participant, someone present without needing applause. What made that era unique was how music success pulled street energy closer instead of pushing it away. Labels carried larger entourages, rivalries intensified, nightlife blended entertainment with unpredictable tension. Wolf operated comfortably inside that intersection, translating street awareness into stability within celebrity environments. His influence grew through reliability rather than promotion, which meant fewer interviews but deeper trust among insiders. That pattern defined his trajectory, shaping a life moving parallel to fame without chasing center stage directly. Looking back, that reintroduction to Puffy marked a pivot that redirected everything unfolding afterward. It connected Bronx survival instincts with a rapidly expanding music empire preparing to shape global culture. From that point forward, Wolf's path would intertwine with artists, executives, conflicts, opportunities far beyond neighborhood scope. Yet even as circles widened, his foundation stayed rooted in lessons learned long before industry lights appeared. That blend of music proximity and street gravity would define the chapters waiting ahead, where influence traveled quietly alongside danger that few outsiders fully understood. By 1994, Bad Boy Entertainment stopped looking like a risky startup and started moving like a machine, reshaping East Coast rap energy. Craig Mack's Flavor in Ya Ear climbed radio charts while Christopher Wallace, already calling himself the notorious B.I.G., built serious anticipation. That momentum pushed Sean Combs deeper into the industry spotlight, forcing the label into rooms where pressure multiplied fast. Success pulled more people toward the brand, which meant larger crowds, louder environments, higher stakes surrounding every appearance. Inside that growth, Wolf stayed close, moving quietly while everything around him accelerated. Christopher Wallace especially relied on tight protection during those early breakout years, since fame arrived almost overnight. Shows packed faster than venues expected, and New York crowds carried unpredictable energy when stars first crossed into mainstream territory. Wolf often stayed near Biggie during club nights, guiding movement through packed spaces where excitement could flip quickly. People who attended those events remember seeing him positioned slightly behind, watching entrances, exits, and body language across rooms. That presence created breathing room for artists navigating the attention they were still learning to handle. Studio sessions carried their own kind of chaos once Bad Boy's roster expanded beyond a single breakout act. Producers, friends, label affiliates, neighborhood connections all packed into recording spaces during long nights stretching toward mornings. Those environments mixed celebration with tension, since too many personalities in tight quarters could spark problems unexpectedly. Wolf rarely dominated those rooms verbally, instead observing quietly while conversations flowed around him. Engineers and assistants later recalled how things stayed calmer whenever he remained nearby without needing direct involvement. Nightclubs became another arena where Bad Boy's rise collided with real-world unpredictability almost nightly. Venues like Club New York, The Tunnel, and various Manhattan hotspots hosted appearances that doubled as business meetings and social battlegrounds. Rival crews, curious fans, industry competitors often shared floors, creating unpredictable dynamics no one could fully script. Wolf's role inside those scenes grew naturally, guiding movement while scanning rooms with practiced patience. People who noticed him often described stillness more than aggression, which made his presence stand out differently. Stories about him keeping situations under control spread quietly through industry circles without feeding tabloid coverage. Promoters valued stability more than headlines, especially when hosting artists capable of filling entire venues quickly. Having someone reliable around meant fewer incidents escalating into police involvement or canceled shows. That reliability built his reputation stronger than publicity ever could during those formative years. Influence sometimes travels fastest through word of mouth, especially within tight entertainment ecosystems, valuing trust above everything. As the label expanded, his responsibilities stretched beyond basic security into problem-solving across multiple fronts. Artists dealt with disputes, promoters missed payments, and rival tensions surfaced during tours or recording schedules. Wolf often handled conversations others avoided, using calm delivery to diffuse potential escalations before they turned physical. Those moments rarely reached newspapers, yet insiders remembered them clearly years later. His role slowly shifted from bodyguard into fixer territory, someone navigating gray areas few acknowledged publicly. Rumors eventually surfaced, suggesting he handled financial pressures behind the scenes, though details remain difficult to verify clearly. Some stories claim he helped collect debts tied to promotions or appearances when payments lagged. Others suggest he mediated disputes between crews trying to maintain business relationships despite personal tension. None of those accounts carry full documentation, yet they persist across interviews and memoirs from people orbiting Bad Boy's early orbit. What remains consistent is the image of someone managing friction quietly without needing recognition. Industry figures who worked near Combs during that period often describe Wolf using the same phrases repeatedly when discussing him. Words like calm, steady, composed appear more than flashy or explosive across those recollections. He did not present himself like a typical nightclub enforcer trying to intimidate crowds through volume. Instead, observers describe a controlled energy that made people reconsider decisions without dramatic confrontations. That calm intensity created a unique presence, shaping how others interacted around him. His name began circulating more widely as Bad Boy's dominance solidified across radio, television, and touring circuits. Yet, mainstream audiences rarely heard about him directly, since his influence existed mostly within inner circles. Artists, promoters, security teams, even rival camps recognized the name through conversations rather than press coverage. That type of recognition built mystique organically, giving him a reputation without needing a personal spotlight. By the mid-1990s, Wolf had become one of those figures known everywhere inside the culture, while remaining invisible outside it. That balance between visibility and obscurity defined his position during Bad Boy's explosive ascent. He operated close enough to power to shape outcomes, yet distant enough from fame to avoid constant scrutiny. While Combs, Biggie, Faith Evans, and others filled magazine pages, Wolf stayed just outside camera frames. That placement allowed him to influence events without becoming their headline focus directly. As Bad Boy kept rising, his shadow stretched quietly behind him, growing longer with each success the world could finally see. By the mid-1990s, hip-hop stopped feeling like a regional competition and started resembling a Cold War dividing coasts. New York labels pushed glossy success, while Los Angeles crews built raw dominance through Death Row Records' explosive rise. That tension stayed mostly lyrical at first, trading bars across magazines, radio shows, and interviews, feeding cultural rivalry. Yet underneath those public exchanges, personal relationships between camps began straining in quieter ways. People close to both sides sensed something heavier building long before headlines admitted it openly. Suge Knight stood at the center of that West Coast momentum, moving with confidence that carried real street backing. Death Row's alliance with Compton circles meant rivalries carried weight far beyond studio microphones or award stages. Sean Combs represented the East Coast surge, guiding Bad Boy into spaces once dominated by older industry giants. As both brands grew louder, entourages expanded, egos widened, and misunderstandings multiplied without clear communication between camps. That environment made every encounter feel loaded, even when cameras framed them as simple industry moments. The 1994 shooting of Tupac Shakur inside Quad Studios in Manhattan pushed everything into darker territory. Tupac survived being shot multiple times, later accusing figures around Bad Boy of knowing more than they admitted publicly. His Vibe magazine interview from prison fueled suspicion, especially when he mentioned feeling betrayed by people he once trusted. That moment hardened lines between coasts, transforming rivalry into something closer to personal warfare. From that point forward, every interaction between camps carried invisible baggage nobody could fully unpack. Events like the 1995 Source Awards only intensified those fractures playing out in real time. When Suge Knight stepped on stage in New York and delivered pointed remarks many interpreted as aimed at Puffy, tension rose instantly. East Coast crowds reacted sharply, while West Coast entourages watched closely, creating an atmosphere thick with unresolved hostility. People who attended that night still described the room feeling split, like two different energies occupying one stage. Moments like that pushed beef from rumors into lived experiences, shaping future encounters. The Atlanta birthday party for Jermaine Dupri later that year became the setting where the myth surrounding Wolf truly began forming. Accounts agree that both Bad Boy and Death Row figures attended, though details blur once describing what followed afterward. Sometime after the celebration moved toward the Platinum House nightclub, conflict erupted outside involving Suge Knight's close associate, Big Jake Robles. Gunfire struck Robles multiple times, leaving him fatally wounded during the chaos that witnesses still describe differently. That single incident created a mystery echoing through hip-hop history without definitive closure. Some narratives claim a shooter connected to Bad Boy approached Robles during confusion, firing at close range before disappearing quickly. Others insist the moment unfolded too chaotically for clear identification, suggesting rival factions misread movements under pressure. Former Bad Boy figures like Mark Curry later described hearing multiple versions even among people standing nearby. No arrests ever solidified the story publicly, which allowed speculation to fill gaps where facts should have lived. That uncertainty became the perfect soil for legends to grow without resistance. Wolf's name entered those whispers almost immediately, though no formal charges tied him directly to the killing. His proximity to Puffy and his quiet reputation made him an easy figure for rumors searching direction. Within months, stories circulated painting him either as triggerman or silent witness, depending on who told them. None of those claims carried courtroom weight, yet repetition gave them emotional credibility across street conversations. Myth often grows fastest where silence leaves room for imagination to operate unchecked. Suge Knight's later accusations added gravity that pushed those whispers into mainstream curiosity. He publicly suggested Bad Boy's involvement in Robles' death, indirectly pointing suspicion toward people around Combs. Media outlets picked up those claims cautiously, repeating allegations without confirming specifics through verified investigations. That coverage amplified intrigue, placing Wolf's name inside broader narratives about East Coast retaliation. Once television and magazines joined street talk, the line separating fact from folklore blurred permanently. From that point forward, unresolved truth began following him like a shadow nobody could outrun completely. Each appearance around industry circles carried undertones, shaped by stories lacking clear answers or final rulings. People who barely knew him still spoke his name cautiously, influenced more by rumor than documented events. That ambiguity built a mystique stronger than publicity ever could manufacture intentionally. By the late 1990s, Wolf existed inside a strange space where reputation traveled faster than proof ever did. By the end of 1999, Bad Boy had gained global visibility, yet pressure followed every appearance Sean Combs made across Manhattan nightlife. December 27th brought that pressure into Club New York, a packed venue hosting artists, models, promoters, and cameras chasing celebrity energy. Inside that crowd stood Combs with Jennifer Lopez on his arm, rising artist Jamal Shine Barrow nearby, and Anthony Wolf Jones moving quietly. The night began like countless others, music loud, VIP sections crowded, people leaning in, hoping proximity might translate into opportunity. What unfolded minutes later turned a routine party into one of the most infamous shootings tied to hip-hop's late decade. Accounts describe tension forming near the bar area after an argument involving Shine, and another patron escalated suddenly. Voices rose, bodies shifted, and confusion spread as security struggled to control a room already packed beyond comfort. Witnesses later said gunfire erupted within seconds, with shots striking walls, tables, and 3 innocent bystanders. Natanya Rubin, one of those injured, would later testify she remembered chaos more than clarity during those moments. Panic swept the floor instantly, sending celebrities and unknown guests rushing for exits without understanding what triggered the violence. Inside that confusion stood 4 names that would dominate headlines within hours across national media. Sean Combs, Jennifer Lopez, Shine, and Wolf were all confirmed inside the club when shots rang out. Surveillance footage later showed them moving toward the exit quickly as screams filled the room behind them. None of them stopped to explain anything, since survival instincts override clarity when bullets replace music. That chaotic escape would later shape public perception long before any courtroom testimony arrived. What happened after they reached the street added another layer that fueled the coming storm. Authorities later alleged the group fled in a Lincoln Navigator, triggering a police pursuit through Manhattan streets. Officers eventually stopped the vehicle, discovering a firearm inside that would anchor multiple criminal charges. That arrest shifted the story instantly from nightclub incident to full criminal investigation involving global celebrities. Within hours, every major outlet carried the footage, turning a violent night into non-stop television coverage. The media explosion that followed felt relentless, since Combs and Lopez were among the most recognizable figures on earth. Tabloids ran front pages showing club photos beside courtroom sketches, while cable news debated guilt daily. Shine's name rose nationally almost overnight, transforming him from a newcomer into a defendant under constant scrutiny. Meanwhile, Wolf faced something heavier, since prior convictions made new charges carry devastating potential consequences. For him, the case represented more than headlines. It threatened permanent incarceration. Prosecutors moved aggressively, stacking weapons possession and bribery accusations that painted a harsh picture inside court filings. One allegation claimed Combs attempted to bribe a driver to claim ownership of the recovered firearm. If proven, those charges could have dragged everyone involved into years behind bars without parole flexibility. Wolf's situation looked especially dangerous, since repeat offender statutes increased sentencing risk dramatically. Observers at the time openly discussed life imprisonment as a realistic outcome if convictions landed. The trial that followed stretched into 2001, drawing cameras and crowds rarely seen in criminal proceedings. Jurors listened to conflicting testimonies where witnesses disagreed about who fired shots inside Club New York. Some identified Shine as the shooter, while others claimed Combs held a weapon during the chaos. Defense teams attacked inconsistencies relentlessly, turning each contradiction into leverage inside the courtroom. That strategy gradually shifted momentum away from early assumptions, dominating public conversation. Wolf maintained a low profile during proceedings, appearing composed while lawyers battled narratives unfolding around him. Courtroom sketches often captured his serious expression, reinforcing an image already shaped by years of rumor. Unlike celebrities beside him, he rarely spoke publicly, allowing legal arguments to define his presence. That silence added mystique, making observers project stories onto someone offering little personal explanation. Sometimes absence of commentary builds stronger images than endless interviews ever could. When verdicts finally arrived, outcomes reshaped everyone's trajectory permanently. Sean Combs and Anthony Jones were acquitted of major charges, walking free despite months of intense scrutiny. Jennifer Lopez had already seen charges dropped earlier, distancing her from the case entirely. Shine, however, received a 10-year sentence, absorbing consequences that split public opinion sharply. That divergence turned the trial into a symbol of unequal outcomes depending on perspective. For Wolf, the acquittal solidified a reputation already forming through earlier whispers and unresolved stories. Surviving that courtroom storm elevated him in street mythology, presenting him as someone untouched by cages closing around others. People began speaking his name differently afterward, attaching ideas about luck, loyalty, and invisible protection. He walked out of that trial carrying freedom, yet the narrative following him changed permanently. From that point forward, Anthony Wolf Jones became known as a man who somehow slipped through consequences others could not escape. Walking out of that courthouse in 2001 meant freedom on paper, yet life around Anthony Jones did not return to what it looked like before. The Club New York case left fractures inside relationships that never fully healed once cameras stopped watching. Sean Combs pivoted quickly back into business, focusing on music, fashion, and rebuilding brand momentum after months of scrutiny. Publicly, the acquittal looked like a victory, but privately, the situation carried heavier emotional fallout across the circle. Court battles have a way of reshaping loyalty, especially when outcomes divide people standing inside the same frame. The most obvious shift surrounded Jamal Shine Barrow, whose conviction created a permanent scar within Bad Boy's inner world. He entered prison while Combs and Jones stepped back into daylight, creating tension nobody could ignore quietly. Fans debated fairness constantly, arguing over who truly carried responsibility for that chaotic night inside the club. That debate followed everyone connected to the case, spilling into interviews, songs, and street conversations for years afterward. Even without direct statements, the distance between former allies became visible in subtle ways. Within industry circles, people noticed how rarely Combs and Shine appeared connected once the verdict was settled permanently. Business moved forward, albums dropped, tours resumed, yet something intangible stayed fractured beneath success. Shine later spoke publicly about feeling abandoned, adding emotional weight to a story already heavy with speculation. Those sentiments reshaped how outsiders interpreted the case, casting shadows over friendships once marketed as brotherhood. For Wolf, standing between loyalty and survival meant navigating a quieter internal conflict few documented openly. He remained respected within Bad Boy's orbit, yet observers began describing a more guarded version emerging slowly. Years of rumors followed by courtroom pressure had sharpened instincts already shaped by prison survival earlier in life. Friends from the Bronx said he spoke less freely afterward, choosing words carefully during conversations once filled with jokes. That change did not make him distant entirely, but it introduced caution where ease once existed. Sometimes, surviving public storms teaches people to move differently even when circumstances appear unchanged. On the streets, however, his reputation surged to another level after that acquittal concluded. Escaping potential life sentences in two different eras created a mythology that spread quickly through urban circles nationwide. People referenced his name when discussing resilience, framing him as someone blessed with rare survival luck. That narrative grew independent from official records, living mostly inside conversations happening far from news cameras. Street mythology often ignores nuance, focusing instead on outcomes that sound almost impossible. Promoters, artists, and security teams all started viewing him through that elevated lens shaped by survival stories. Being around him carried a different energy now, less casual, more aware of everything he represented symbolically. Younger figures especially treated him like living proof that certain people move through danger untouched. That perception increased influence without him actively chasing it, reinforcing the mystique built over the years quietly. Sometimes, reputation expands fastest when someone stops trying to shape it intentionally. Despite that rising respect, subtle withdrawal from public scenes began marking his movements more clearly. He appeared less frequently at high-profile parties, where cameras lingered longest during the early 2000s nightlife. Those who worked around Combs noticed he preferred staying behind the scenes rather than standing beside celebrities directly. That shift might have reflected simple fatigue or deeper recognition that constant visibility invites unwanted attention. Either way, the change signaled someone reassessing proximity to the spotlight after surviving intense scrutiny. Conversations among older associates hinted that the trial forced deeper reflection about longevity beyond immediate survival. Escaping prison twice does not erase the psychological weight attached to almost losing freedom permanently. Friends later described moments where he seemed thoughtful, watching environments rather than dominating them socially. That kind of awareness usually grows from experience rather than fear alone, shaped by years navigating unpredictable terrain. Survival leaves marks invisible to outsiders, yet obvious to those who knew someone before and after. Even with that inward shift, his presence still carried authority. Whenever he entered rooms across New York or Atlanta, people stood straighter, spoke differently, aware they were near someone whose story already felt larger than headlines. That aura came from accumulation rather than single events, built through prison survival, industry proximity, and courtroom victories. Yet with every legend comes an undercurrent, suggesting cycles rarely last forever. Whispers started appearing quietly, not predictions exactly, more like uneasy recognition that luck has limits. By the early 2000s, Anthony Jones walked free, yet carried a different kind of weight invisible to casual observers. Freedom surrounded him, but history clung close, shaping how people approached him and how he approached life. Each victory added layers rather than closure, building a narrative still unfolding without resolution. Those watching closely sensed something shifting beneath surface success, though nobody could explain it clearly then. Sometimes survival stories grow heavier before their final chapters reveal what they were always building toward. As the early 2000s unfolded, Anthony Jones spent more time outside New York, following currents shifting across southern cities. Atlanta especially pulled attention during that era, transforming into a booming hub where music, nightlife, and street economies blended tightly. Record labels opened offices there, artists relocated, promoters built empires fueled by regional radio and packed clubs. That migration created new circles forming quickly, drawing people who understood both industry momentum and underground influence. For someone like Wolf, Atlanta offered fresh terrain where reputation could travel ahead of introductions. Buckhead nightlife captured that energy perfectly, hosting venues where celebrities mingled with figures moving outside mainstream attention. Clubs like Chaos, Velvet Room, and Platinum House became stages where power displayed itself through presence rather than announcements. Expensive cars lined parking lots, while VIP sections filled with entourages arriving from multiple states nightly. That environment rewarded connections more than resumes, making it ideal for people accustomed to navigating layered spaces. Wolf moved comfortably through those rooms, blending familiar instincts with unfamiliar surroundings that still felt recognizable. Around that period, his network expanded through introductions connecting him to the Flannery brothers, Demetrius Big Meech Flannery, and Terry Southwest T. Flannery. Their organization, later widely known as Black Mafia Family, was building influence stretching from Detroit to Atlanta and beyond. Early encounters reportedly happened through nightlife overlaps, where music figures and street entrepreneurs crossed paths regularly. Those introductions mattered since BMF's reach extended across both entertainment promotion and illicit economies operating beneath. Being seen alongside them immediately elevated the mystique surrounding anyone entering that orbit. Atlanta's party culture amplified everything tied to visibility, especially when money flowed freely during those peak years. Lavish gatherings filled mansions, strip clubs, and private lounges, often documented through photos circulating across early internet forums. BMF became synonymous with excess, champagne towers, exotic cars, and celebrity appearances, turning nights into spectacles. Wolf's presence at some of those gatherings added fuel to stories spreading rapidly across cities. Even limited sightings could transform into mythology once filtered through conversations moving faster than facts. Photos from that era, though rare, carried weight whenever they surfaced in magazines or later online archives. A single image showing him near Meech or Terry could spark endless interpretations about alliances. People analyzed body language, proximity, expressions, trying to decode relationships based on fragments frozen in time. That kind of scrutiny fed legends organically, since ambiguity invites imagination more than clarity ever does. Each sighting extended his narrative beyond Bronx roots into broader national street folklore. Working around BMF circles also meant stepping deeper into hybrid worlds, blending legitimacy with shadows again. The organization hosted concerts, financed parties, built entertainment connections while rumors swirled about activities far outside legal boundaries. That overlap mirrored environments Wolf had navigated before, where music success lived beside street influence without clear separation. Operating there required awareness sharpened through years of balancing multiple identities across different spaces. Familiar instincts guided him, even as surroundings shifted geographically. Not every story from that era aligns perfectly, since accounts vary depending on who tells them and when. Some insiders describe close friendships forming quickly, emphasizing loyalty built through shared experiences across nightlife scenes. Others recall more distant ties, suggesting proximity came from mutual circles rather than deep alliances. Those conflicting memories highlight how difficult it becomes to reconstruct relationships formed inside environments built on discretion. Truth often sits somewhere between extremes when narratives stretch across decades. Despite outward displays of unity, subtle tension reportedly existed beneath glamorous surfaces during certain moments. High visibility environments naturally create friction, especially when egos and influence intersect under constant observation. Small misunderstandings could carry larger consequences once reputations reach national scale. Observers later hinted that not every interaction remained smooth, despite photos suggesting otherwise. Those quiet complexities rarely appeared publicly, yet they shaped dynamics unfolding behind closed doors. For Wolf, Atlanta represented both expansion and repetition, introducing new allies while echoing patterns from earlier years. He moved through spaces where loyalty mattered deeply, yet stakes often rose faster than expectations. Each connection carried opportunity alongside risk, reinforcing duality, defining much of his adult life. Friends from New York sometimes remarked how natural that environment looked on him despite the geographical distance. Certain personalities adapt easily to new cities when underlying structures feel familiar. As years passed, those Atlanta chapters added layers to his legend without providing clear answers about where paths might lead. Being linked to BMF elevated mystique, yet it also placed him inside narratives carrying unpredictable trajectories. The city's rise mirrored his own evolving story, both filled with promise wrapped in uncertainty. People watching closely sensed currents, shifting beneath glamorous appearances, though few predicted how events might converge later. Quietly, foundations were forming for moments that would eventually pull everything into sharper focus. By late 2003, stories around Atlanta nightlife started carrying a different tone whenever Anthony Jones's name surfaced in conversations. Earlier years focused mostly on parties, connections, and expanding influence across circles, blending music with the street presence. Yet beneath those polished images, smaller conflicts reportedly began surfacing through whispers shared between promoters and regular clubgoers. Many of those tensions sounded ordinary at first, involving bruised pride, unpaid tabs, and misunderstandings growing inside crowded environments. In cities built on reputation, even minor disagreements can gain weight once powerful names enter the mix. Several accounts suggest friction tied to relationships, including disputes involving women moving between overlapping social circles. Nightlife ecosystems often create complicated dynamics where attention carries social currency beyond simple admiration. Some stories claim jealousy sparked arguments between entourages already sensitive about respect and perception. Others frame those moments as misunderstandings exaggerated later through gossip spreading faster than facts. What remains consistent is that tension appeared gradually rather than exploding from nowhere overnight. Money also reportedly entered those conversations, especially inside scenes where status depended heavily on spending patterns. Atlanta clubs during that era rewarded visible wealth, turning bottle service and VIP tables into symbols of dominance. When large entourages shared tight spaces, even small financial slights could trigger outsized reactions. Some insiders later mentioned disagreements over tabs, hosting privileges, or perceived disrespect around payments. None of those details carry universal confirmation, yet they surface repeatedly across recollections from people present. Ego naturally threaded through every version of those stories, shaping how situations escalated beyond their original scope. Figures operating at high levels rarely view conflicts as minor once public perception becomes involved. A harsh look, a raised voice, or a dismissive gesture can signal deeper disrespect in those environments. Observers later recalled moments where conversations felt tense even before anything physical happened. That kind of atmosphere builds pressure slowly, like a storm gathering, without clear lightning yet. When discussing the night at Club Chaos specifically, narratives diverge almost immediately depending on who recounts them. Some versions suggest arguments started earlier during private gatherings before anyone entered the club itself. Others claim tensions ignited inside the venue, sparked by passing comments overheard in crowded sections. A few witnesses insist nothing seemed wrong until moments before violence erupted outside. Those contradictions illustrate how memory fragments differently once chaos replaces clarity. People who claim proximity to the events often describe heated exchanges taking place earlier that evening. Some say voices rose between members of separate entourages near VIP areas or side rooms. Others recall arguments spilling toward entrances, drawing attention from security, trying to keep things contained. None of those recollections align perfectly in timing, which complicates efforts to reconstruct a precise timeline. In high-energy nightlife, moments blur quickly once music, alcohol, and adrenaline mix freely. Witness statements collected afterward reflected similar inconsistencies, reinforcing uncertainty surrounding what truly unfolded. Certain accounts described visible hostility hours before gunfire, while others insisted tension surfaced suddenly without warning signs. Differences in vantage points likely shape those memories, since crowded clubs limit what individuals actually see. People standing across rooms experience entirely different realities during fast-moving incidents. That fragmentation leaves investigators piecing together stories lacking cohesive alignment. Atlanta nightlife during that period also carried another element, shaping how conflicts unfolded beneath surface glamour. Armed entourages were not uncommon, especially among figures operating at intersections of music fame and street influence. Security teams often included individuals accustomed to carrying weapons, whether legally or otherwise, creating environments where escalation could turn deadly quickly. That reality rarely appeared in promotional images showing champagne celebrations and celebrity smiles. Beneath flashing lights, danger lingered closer than most outsiders realize. Inside those conditions, misunderstandings could spiral rapidly once multiple groups felt threatened simultaneously. Each entourage arrived expecting respect, while suspicion hovered whenever unfamiliar faces moved too closely. One aggressive movement could trigger defensive reactions, spreading faster than anyone could control. Witnesses later described the mood outside certain Atlanta venues as tense even on ordinary nights. When layered onto existing friction, that atmosphere increased the likelihood of serious outcomes. Accounts leading toward the Club Chaos parking lot often mention a sense of unease building gradually before shots ever fired. Some describe body language shifting, conversations shortening, and laughter fading into quieter observation. Others recall noticing people repositioning themselves, stepping outside more frequently as tension thickened subtly. None of those signs pointed clearly toward violence, yet they suggested energy shifting beneath surface celebrations. That creeping discomfort appears repeatedly across recollections, despite disagreement over details. Importantly, no single narrative dominates the backstory, leaving historians and fans working through fragments years later. Some portray the night as an inevitable collision between powerful personalities carrying unresolved tensions. Others insist events could have unfolded differently if smaller arguments had cooled earlier. The absence of definitive clarity keeps interpretations open, allowing speculation to grow around partial truths. That uncertainty mirrors earlier chapters of Wolf's life, shaped by unresolved stories lacking final confirmation. What stands clear is how ordinary disputes gain dangerous weight within environments already primed for escalation. Women, money, pride, and perception intersected inside spaces where reputation mattered intensely. Those ingredients alone do not guarantee violence, yet combined with armed entourages, they create volatile conditions. By the time events drifted toward the Club Chaos parking lot, tension had layered quietly across multiple levels. No one present could fully predict what would happen next, though many later said the air already felt different before everything changed. When the noise finally broke through the Buckhead air outside Club Chaos in the early hours of November 11, 2003, the moment unfolded faster than anyone could process clearly. Parking lot security cameras captured fragments rather than full clarity, showing figures moving between vehicles under dim lighting. Witnesses later described hearing sudden gunfire without fully seeing where shots originated or how many weapons were involved. Chaos spread instantly, sending people ducking behind cars or running toward nearby exits without looking back. That same confusion framed the opening of this story, where clarity never fully caught up with what actually happened. Reports from Atlanta police later confirmed multiple people were struck during the shooting, including Anthony Wolf Jones and Lamont Girdy. Both men were known to move together for years, making their simultaneous injuries feel tragically familiar to those who knew their history. Medical responders arrived quickly, yet the damage had already defined the night beyond recovery. Girdy sustained fatal wounds alongside Jones, whose injuries proved equally devastating once emergency crews assessed the scene. The violence unfolded in seconds, yet its consequences would stretch across decades of speculation. Demetrius Big Meech Flannery also suffered a gunshot wound that night, though he survived after receiving treatment. His survival added complexity to narratives forming almost immediately afterward, especially given his prominence within BMF circles. Some witnesses claimed he was near Jones when shots erupted, while others remembered a different positioning entirely. That disagreement became one of many contradictions shaping the case from the very beginning. Even verified facts carried uncertainty once layered against conflicting memories. Police arriving minutes later found a scene already fractured by fear and confusion. Witnesses scattered quickly, leaving investigators with partial accounts that rarely aligned cleanly. Shell casings, damaged vehicles, and blood-stained pavement became the primary physical evidence left behind. Officers struggled piecing together timelines when most people present hesitated speaking openly about what they saw. That silence would later shape the case as much as the shooting itself. Initial arrests followed in the days after the incident, with authorities detaining several individuals connected to the scene. Yet charges shifted repeatedly As investigations struggled to balance testimony against limited concrete evidence, some suspects were released, others saw cases weaken as witnesses recanted or refused cooperation. Over time, prosecutions lost momentum, leaving questions suspended without final courtroom closure. That legal ambiguity allowed multiple interpretations to coexist without definitive resolution. The lack of a clear conviction deepened uncertainty already surrounding the circumstances of that night. For people tracking the story closely, the absence of closure felt strangely consistent with earlier chapters of Jones's life. Major moments around him often ended without clean conclusions, reinforcing an image shaped by unresolved outcomes. The Club Chaos shooting followed that same pattern, offering fragments rather than full explanations. In that way, the ending echoed earlier mysteries tied to his name. Among details recorded in official reports, one small fact carried unusual emotional weight afterward. Investigators documented that Jones still had roughly $7,000 in cash on him when officers searched the scene. The amount was not extraordinary for someone moving through Atlanta nightlife at that level, yet the symbolism lingered quietly. Money remained untouched even as life slipped away, creating a haunting contrast difficult to ignore. That image stayed with people long after headlines faded. What makes that final moment striking is how abruptly everything stopped without cinematic buildup or dramatic resolution. No long standoff unfolded, no final words echoed through microphones capturing the last exchanges. Violence arrived suddenly, ending a life built through decades of survival across multiple dangerous environments. The randomness of the scene left little room for poetic closure or heroic framing. It ended the same way many real stories do, quickly, unevenly, leaving more questions than answers. In the end, the parking lot where it happened looked ordinary again, within hours of police clearing the scene. Cars returned, lights glowed, music resumed inside venues nearby, as if nothing permanent had shifted. Yet for those who knew Anthony Jones, that space became a dividing line between myth and memory. Everything before felt complicated, layered with survival stories and whispered legends. Everything after would grow quieter, shaped more by reflection than presence. News of Anthony Jones's death traveled quickly across New York, Atlanta, and beyond, carried through phone calls and early internet forums. For people who knew him personally, the shock lay less in violence and more in its finality. A man who survived prison sentences, industry rivalries, and public trials had finally fallen in a place built on nightlife excess. That contradiction hit hard across circles, stretching from Bronx blocks to Atlanta lounges. Reactions formed immediately, blending grief with disbelief at how abruptly everything ended. Funeral services brought together an unusual mix of attendees, reflecting the dual worlds he moved through. Family members, childhood friends, music industry figures, and street associates all gathered under the same roof. Stories shared during those days focused more on personal memories than myths already forming outside. People remembered humor, loyalty, and protective instincts rarely captured by headlines later. Those quieter recollections offered contrast to narratives growing louder beyond funeral walls. Sean Combs acknowledged the loss publicly, expressing grief in statements that framed Jones as someone deeply connected to his life journey. Observers noted how Combs's image continued shifting around that period, moving further toward polished entrepreneurship. The early 2000s already saw him emphasizing fashion ventures, television appearances, and corporate partnerships. Jones's death marked another emotional pivot within that transformation, separating past eras from evolving identity. Moments like that often accelerate reinvention already underway beneath public surfaces. Yet beyond personal mourning, unresolved questions immediately began shaping how people interpreted the story. Lack of definitive legal closure left space where speculation expanded rapidly without resistance. Some voices connected the shooting back to older rivalries, searching for patterns stretching across decades. Others framed it as internal fallout tied to complex alliances within Atlanta nightlife circles. Absence of clarity allowed multiple narratives to grow simultaneously, without one overtaking the rest fully. Among recurring theories, the shadow of Jake Robles' 1995 killing resurfaced in conversations once again. Certain observers wondered whether old vendettas finally circled back years later, despite lacking direct evidence linking events conclusively. That idea appealed to those viewing hip-hop history through cycles of unresolved retaliation. Still, many close to the situation rejected that framing, emphasizing how much time and distance separated those chapters. The persistence of that theory illustrates how myth often outlives facts in public imagination. Other discussions focus more on loyalty dynamics surrounding alliances formed during the Atlanta years. Questions emerged about trust, shifting relationships, and how proximity to power can complicate friendships. Some narratives hinted at betrayal, without offering concrete proof supporting those claims clearly. Those whispers reflected a broader fascination with the inner workings of circles rarely documented publicly. When information remains scarce, imagination fills gaps quickly. Over time, Anthony Jones's name transformed from a real person into folklore, carried across different generations. Younger listeners encountered him through documentaries, interviews, and street stories, blending truth with embellishment, each retelling adjusted details slightly, reshaping memory according to the storyteller perspective. That evolution mirrors how many figures connected to hip-hop's rougher edges become legends after death.